Good afternoon. How are you? You have to forgive me. I haven't been out for a few days because we've been dealing with things. First of all, my cases have kept me busy, but the biggest thing that happened was on Friday. Holly had some pain in her stomach. We went to a local doctor, and because she's a double lung transplant, they want to be very careful. So we went from A to B to C, and the next thing we knew is we were in Baltimore at Johns Hopkins Hospital, and they're very thorough, and so they wanted to check out any suspicious pain. So there's a barrage of tests they had. We went through several different hospital beds. I slept on the floor when I wasn't sleeping in the chair, and I went through the night, and in a way it's still going on now. I left Holly there to come back and take care of our animals and so forth. So we've been busy. I'll keep you posted. The original concern about pain as a result of some imaging doesn't appear to be a problem, but the power of the lung transplant unit is their thoroughness. So Holly, for a year and a half after the operation, has had no infections or rejections, and we're hoping that we're going to find as a result of these tests that that's still the case. But we have to be very careful because when you're so immunosuppressed in the current environment, including the comeback, if you will, of another strain of COVID, you have to be very careful. So back to what's happening on the ground politically. It's very interesting, the reaction of people covering what's happening in Georgia and D.C. And Florida. Not so much Bragg's case in New York. The indications are, I think, all against Trump. And to be fair, I know that none of this is easy, but I believe that that's a fair evaluation. Let's start with resources. One of the problems with any criminal case is, can you bear the fight? And Trump apparently doesn't have liquid cash himself. And although he first rebuffed Rudy, he then said he would put on a fundraiser for him, meaning somebody else's money. There are other lawyers that apparently are jumping ship because they're not being paid or because they're being directed to do things they're not comfortable with, or other reasons. We'll find those out in the days ahead, because the security and confidentiality of information in the Trump domain is like a sieve. It comes out if you're just patient and just wait. The principal tells us what's going on, or the people themselves. You can't have so many charges against you in so many jurisdictions, claim you're running for president, and not have that affect you. I don't care how good you are at organizing, how much wealth you have, how many loyal people that you have. So all these things say the fall of Trump is inevitable, as the mugshot and fingerprinting electronically that did happen. And he can jump through all these hoops and, pass out for fee copies of his mugshot, but it doesn't change the most important point, which is that he's guilty of sin. He will be found guilty of sin, and the question will be, will we put him in custody? Now, there are a couple of approaches going on here, particularly in Georgia, because there are so many defendants. That is to say, 19 including Trump and 30 unindicted co-conspirators, meaning possible conflict with some of the witnesses. So we have to keep that in mind. The speedy trial rule has been invoked by several of the defendants. And the idea is, we're entitled to a speedy trial, and we want a speedy trial, and so you've got to give us one. Well, that's not what Trump wants, and the prosecutor may want it. And beware of what you ask for, because you may get it. And the second question they say is, sever us, meaning separate us who want this speedy trial from the other defendants. And that can become a complicated question, because if there are demonstrated defenses at odds with each other, theoretically, every defendant could be tried separately. Now, if I were the prosecutor and was forced to do that, you know who'd be first in the trick bag? It'd be our boy, Trump. In Virginia, for example, years ago, there was a conspiracy case that I handled, many years ago now. And in Virginia, there were provisions that provided that an individual could be tried separately upon demand, and we did that. Of the 3 cases I handled, we got a minimum sentence in one. It started out a pretty large sentence. I got practically a deferred sentence in the second case. And the third case, I actually brought a speedy trial claim. And the speedy trial claim I raised was, we're ready for trial, and the government is choosing to go after someone else instead of my client at the time. And it was the state attorney general, and their office said, oh, I didn't know what I was talking about. So after making the motion, and they had one or more trials after I made this objection, then they decided they wanted to try my client. And I objected on the last possible day, so I'd have the most amount of time of violation of the speedy trial rules. And the judge sat on the motion for 8 months, I think, trying to find a way around it, and couldn't, and dismissed the case on speedy trial grounds. This Georgia case is not that case. There isn't the procedural paraphernalia that I had available, and I don't think the merits are there. But we'll see how that sorts out. We will also observe some problems because lawyers are going to travel in and out of this case with conflicts or not being paid or disagreements with Trump. Hard to believe, I know. And there are a couple of defendants who are seeking to remove the case to federal court. Now, that'll be interesting to watch on Monday, because on Monday there's going to be testimony by the Secretary of State about, I assume, his conversations and the importunate demands made upon him and the state by Trump. The question of whether, in the case of Meadows, who was the chief of staff for Trump, whether he can be involved in matters of national importance and then put on his hat and basically advise the president about campaigning, and on top of that, be involved and advise him on what is an interference with, subversion of an election by demanding a certain number of votes be transferred to him under penalty of certain claims. And that's all in the pleadings. I think the judge is going to be a little anxious about finding that. The person who seeks to remove must, him or herself, be a public official, but also doing something consistent with the responsibilities of that public official. Crimes are usually not. So we'll see how the court slices and dices that, but we're gonna see that happening. The other fly in the ointment is whether or not a bill signed by the state governor will seek to remove Willis as the prosecutor on the case. There are religious leaders who are accusing the governor of basically defying the vote of the public who chose her, and there is no good reason to put her name before a commission for failing to prosecute people when she has prosecuted people. And according to the reports I've read, there is a suit against this action, and an injunction was apparently granted by the commission. So that may be going nowhere. We also have to look at what's going on in terms of the polling data. Now, it appears that Americans, according to this recent poll, they want a trial before the election, number one. Half believe that Trump is guilty, and half believe he should go to jail. So that's those are not the favorable numbers that Trump claims gin up his supporters, because it looks like he gins up his supporters and he may get the nomination, but the general election appears to be a different proposition. Good for the home team. Finally, I have to make a mention, although it's worth more than that, that we had the 60th anniversary of Martin Luther King's March on Washington, a march that helped give strength to Kennedy's support of civil rights and of Johnson introducing and passing certain bills. This action was very dramatic, given all the years of discrimination in America that do now continue. And if there's anything we can take from the celebration and declaration of going forward in support of the values of Martin Luther King on that day, and those who stood with him and those who still stand with him, it is that, Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I can't imagine a more encompassing expression of what we're dealing with in America. We have seen outright discrimination. We saw it on the day Trump came down his golden staircase, and we've seen it ever since. And we think of Charlottesville as one of those examples, and there are more. But we also, when we're talking about injustice, we talk about a president trying to overturn an election he lost on lies, on a fraud that there was a fraud, on laws that are not acceptable. So I think on this day, we share with Martin Luther King and his spirit of liberty and freedom the same values that we must espouse, not just against these bigots, but against these traitors. So that's what I got today. I'll keep you posted on how Holly and I are doing. And I welcome you to our Cathedral of Trees. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.